My parents cut me off after my darkest moment. Years later, they finally called, but to ask me fund sister's lavish life. I'm 25, and my story isn't just about being kicked out at 17. It's about the long journey of understanding my worth in a family that always seemed to measure love in terms of perfection and performance. Looking back now, I can see how the seeds of what happened were planted long before that fateful night with the police car. Growing up, our house was like a stage, and we all had our assigned roles. My sister, Riley, was the star, the wild child, the free spirit, the one who could do no wrong even when she was doing everything wrong. I was cast as the responsible one, the good boy, the steady presence in the background. It wasn't just about behavior. It was about identity. The weight of those expectations was crushing. Every morning, I'd wake up and put on my perfect son costume. Straight A's, proper manners, quiet compliance. But underneath, there was this growing void, a hunger for something I couldn't name. Maybe it was attention, maybe it was validation, or maybe it was just the simple desire to be seen for who I really was, not who they wanted me to be. I remember the first time I snuck out. No one even noticed when I slipped out my bedroom window. The cool night air felt like freedom, and the thrill of breaking the rules gave me something I'd been missing, a sense of being alive, of being more than just the good one. But what started as small acts of rebellion grew into something darker. The wrong crowd wasn't just wrong, they were lost like me. We found solidarity in our shared pain, in the mutual understanding that came from being the black sheep, the disappointments, the ones who didn't quite fit. Drinking wasn't about having fun. It was about numbing the constant ache of not being enough. One night, things got out of hand. I had been drinking with some friends, and on a dare, I decided to vandalize a cop car parked near a corner. Of course, it was a stupid idea, something that in my right mind I would never have done. But at that moment, it felt like it would make me feel something. The adrenaline, the rebellion, it was like a high I couldn't shake. 6 months in juvenile detention changed me, but not in the way my parents think. It wasn't about being punished or learning my lesson. It was about seeing myself clearly for the first time. In that sterile, confined space, surrounded by other lost souls, I began to understand that I had been looking for validation in all the wrong places. The boys I met there had their own stories, tales of abuse, neglect, and desperation. Many of them would have given anything for parents who cared enough to set high expectations. Their stories held up a mirror to my own privilege and pain, showing me that while my hurt was real, my response to it had been self-destructive. When my parents kicked me out, it felt like the end of my world. I was 17, scared, and suddenly homeless. The irony wasn't lost on me. My sister had done far worse, but I was the one being cast out. My grandparents' house became my refuge, though refuge might be too warm a word for what was essentially a strict boarding house with familiar faces. Their home was neat, orderly, and emotionally sterile. Dinner was served at 6 sharp, beds were made with hospital corners, and feelings were treated like unwelcome guests. But in that rigidity, I found something unexpected, structure that helped me rebuild myself. Their house had rules, yes, but they were clear and consistent. Unlike at home, where the rules seemed to shift depending on which son was breaking them. The loneliness was crushing at first. I'd lie awake at night, scrolling through my phone, looking at pictures of my old life. Riley's social media was full of family dinners I wasn't invited to, celebrations I couldn't attend, moments of joy I could only witness through a screen. Each post was like a paper cut to my heart, small but stinging, accumulating until the pain was unbearable. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. I stopped checking Riley's Instagram every day. I started focusing on my own path, finishing high school, applying to colleges, working part-time at a local bookstore. My grandparents, for all their emotional distance, never once made me feel like I was a burden. They provided what they could: shelter, stability, and the space to figure out who I wanted to be. College became my salvation. Away from the shadow of my family's expectations, I could finally breathe. I made friends who liked me for who I was, not what I could do for them. I discovered passions and talents I never knew I had. Most importantly, I learned that my worth wasn't tied to my family's approval. Every attempt I made to reach out to my parents during those years was met with silence. Birthday cards returned unopened. Holiday greetings left unread. Graduation announcements ignored. Each rejection hurt, but each one also made me stronger, more determined to build a life that didn't revolve around their validation. Then, out of nowhere, my parents contacted me. It was a message from my mom, asking if I'd be willing to meet up for dinner. She said they wanted to forgive me and start over. For a moment, I didn't know what to think. My mind raced. Why now? Why, after all these years, after all the pain, were they reaching out? I hadn't spoken to them in so long, and I had convinced myself that I didn't need them anymore. But there was something about the message that made me hesitate. Maybe this was my chance. Maybe they had finally come to terms with their mistakes. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my relationship with them. I agreed to meet them. We set a time for dinner, and when I walked into the restaurant, my heart was in my throat. I had no idea what to expect. My parents, my mom especially, looked older. There was a weariness in their eyes that I hadn't seen before. We sat down at the table, and for a while it was awkward. The silence between us was heavy. Finally, my mom spoke up. "We've thought about it a lot, and we know we hurt you. We know we let you down, and we want to make it right." She paused, looking down at her hands. "We were wrong to kick you out. You didn't deserve that. We should have supported you." My dad, who had been silent up until then, nodded in agreement. I could see the remorse in their eyes, but I also saw something else. It wasn't just about reconciliation, it was about their own guilt. They needed to forgive themselves more than they needed me to forgive them. But then they dropped the bombshell. They didn't just want to apologize. They needed something from me, something I wasn't prepared for. They wanted me to financially support Riley, who had started a luxury lifestyle brand on Instagram. They told me that Riley's brand was struggling and that she wasn't making enough money to maintain her online persona. She was posting photos of luxury vacations and designer clothing. But the truth was, she couldn't afford the lifestyle she was projecting. They wanted me to step in and help fund her fake lifestyle so she could keep up the illusion of success. I was stunned. My parents were asking me to fund my sister's charade? They had the audacity to ask for my money after everything they had done to me? I couldn't believe it. After all the years of being pushed aside, after everything I had gone through, this was their idea of a reconciliation. I told them no. I refused to fund Riley's fake life. I refused to support the lie she had built around herself. But that was the breaking point. My parents tried to guilt me into helping, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to be a part of their scheme, no matter how much they tried to manipulate me. I stood up, feeling surprisingly steady. Maybe not, but neither was what you did to me. The difference is, I'm not 17 anymore, and I don't need your approval to know my worth. As I walked away, I heard my mother call after me. "We're still your parents." I paused at the door, turning back one last time. "Biology doesn't make a family," I said softly. "Love does. And that's something you never quite figured out." The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, my tears felt like release rather than regret. The aftermath hasn't been easy. Family friends have reached out, trying to guilt me into reconsidering. Riley has posted vague, passive-aggressive messages about selfish people and family loyalty. My mother has sent texts alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. But for the first time in my life, their opinions don't define me. I've built my own kind of family now, friends who accept me as I am, mentors who guide without controlling, even my stoic grandparents who, in their own way, showed me what unconditional support really looks like. I've learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with the people who gave you life. Some nights, I still dream about that 17-year-old boy, the one who thought he had to destroy himself to be seen. I wish I could tell him that he was always worthy of love, that his value wasn't determined by his parents' ability to see it. But maybe that's the journey I needed to take, from seeking validation outside myself to finally finding it within. My story isn't about forgiveness, at least not in the traditional sense. It's about accepting that some relationships can't be fixed, that some bridges stay burned, and that's okay. It's about understanding that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, support, and genuine love, not the conditional kind that comes with strings attached. Today, I'm not the perfect son they wanted me to be. I'm something better. I'm authentically myself. And while there's still a small part of me that wishes things could be different, I've come to understand that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is accepting that not every story has a happy ending, at least not the kind we initially hoped for. The peace I've found isn't in reconciliation, but in acceptance. Acceptance of my past, of their limitations, and most importantly, of myself. It's in knowing that I don't need their validation to be whole, that their inability to love me unconditionally speaks to their shortcomings, not mine. Family might be about blood, but healing is about choice. Every day, I choose to write my own story, to define my own worth, to build a life that doesn't depend on the approval of people who couldn't see my value. It's not the happy ending I dreamed of as a child, but it's real, it's honest, and most importantly, it's mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.